Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Saud Anwar. I wanted to talk about the mutations, the variants of SARS-CoV-2 that is getting a lot of attention, and a lot of people have been asking me questions. And I wanted to share some background with you and also talk about the relevance of this from a clinical perspective. So with that, if you've noticed in United Kingdom, what we have learned is about the cases. Suddenly, there was an increase in the number of cases that we have seen. This is rapidly increased at a very, very fast pace, which has caused the concern that majority of the cases now in certain parts of England and parts of the broader United Kingdom have been associated with this new variant. So first you need to understand the variant is same as a mutation. So this is a mutation of the virus, which is causing some of the concerns and the panic that we have. Now, of course, you've heard since last night and this morning, as today is the 30th of December, that the Colorado has had two cases identified, which is the UK variant of the coronavirus that has been identified as at this time. So that's why the fact that these variants are moving from one part of the world to the next is nothing new, but it is important to understand the basics around it. So why do we need to be concerned about variants or the mutations of the SARS-CoV virus? And the way I look at it is from a very practical point of view. I say there are 6 reasons why this is of critical value to us. One, is the severity of the disease index going to change? In other words, is the new virus or the mutated virus going to be more dangerous than the existing one? That is why it's important to know this. First of all, we need to realize that the virus itself was a mutated one because it jumped species. It moved from another species, bats, that we believe, and it has gone into humans. Then if it is actually going to have severity of the illness is going to increase, and is it going to increase the likelihood of spread? And that is actually in this particular case for the variant that we are talking about, which has gained a lot more attention, is because it's spreading faster than the existing virus that we had heard about. Then the impact on the various diagnostic tests, which is relevant as well because we do some tests that identify us to diagnose an individual. Would those tests be impacted from this variant as well? So that's a third question that becomes relevant. And can the new variant lead to reinfections? Again, if somebody already has had an infection and would they get an infection again because of the mutation that has happened? That's a very critical question from a clinician's perspective as well. And it is going to have the impact on the vaccinations that people have received, 1 or 2 dosages of the various type of vaccines. Is it going to have the impact on the immunity around those vaccines? That's another important part that we have to know about these variants, and that's the conversations we need to have. And then, of course, will it jump another species? And then that's why it becomes relevant, because we've already seen it in minks, we've seen it in cats. We want to make sure that there is another species if that's jumped. What would that be relevant? Would it change its manifestation going forward? Would that be a new place for having that species hold on to more viruses, and the risk may increase to humans should there be more mutations? These are the broader questions that we have to ask. The good news is, as of right now, there is no evidence that the severity of the disease is worse with the new variant that is getting a lot of attention. So that's one thing that I want you to be aware of. Number two is the likelihood of spread. That is where we have trouble. As of right now, the initial data that we are hearing from the United Kingdom source and also from South Africa is that the spread is faster with this variant or this mutation. And it does not have an impact on the diagnostic tests, which is good news. It does not lead to reinfection if somebody's already been infected, from what I have learned so far. And the vaccines are protective against this variant as well. So that again is somewhat of a good news, and thankfully it has not jumped any species as of right now. So those are the things that we know about this one. But let's talk a little bit about mutations so that you get an idea what this means, what it entails, and then how we need to recognize this. So I'm going to try to use another example. In our English language, or any language for that matter, we start with letters, and these letters are 26 letters in the alphabet of English, and these letters lead for us to be able to come up with words. And these words become sentences, and the sentences become chapters in a book, and then these chapters lead to the creation of a book, and then we can have multiple copies of the book. I'm giving you a background, which is a simplistic way of trying to explain what mutations would mean, and I will share that with you in a second. But if, let's say, a book that is copied starts to get problems in the copies of the book, and those books are spread to different parts of the world that result in inaccurate information of the book from the original version into those, that have an impact. So we need to know if the errors that are put in the printing of the process of the book, did they actually change the storyline? That means, are the changes or the variations in the book very significant? And can we still understand the story despite what we have seen in the changes? And how much did this copy error or printer error impact the entire book? And who's proofreading this? How can we prevent this? If there are people who are proofreading it at different levels, that results in a protection against the changes that can happen in the book. That's the example. Now let's look at what happens with the viruses. Just like with the viruses, we have letters. The letters that we have for the RNA virus in this particular case are actually 4 letters rather than the 26 that we have. And these are A, U, and C, G, which represents adenosine, uracil, cytosine, and guanine. So these 4 are the part of the letters which result in a combination of 3 in most cases, and maybe in 4 in some, results in words which are amino acids. The amino acids are 20 or so that we know, and these are arginine, valine, leucine, interleucine, histidine, you name it. They're about 20 or so in there, with structures which are dependent on them. So there are 3 parts. You can start, let's say, with A, and then you have G, and you have another G that will be arginine. In the same way, you have a G and a C that would be glycine. So that actually results in a way of these words being formed, and these words, when they are formed in the form of amino acids, multiple amino acids combine together to form a protein structure, and that's the sentence equivalent as a protein structure, and the word equivalent is the amino acids. And then from there we actually can look at various components. Actually, you can see my face in the picture right now, otherwise you'll see different parts to it. Let me see if I can move this up somewhere else. If there's an opportunity, I'll move that out. Good, there we go. So you can actually see that in the chapters there are, we can call this as one chapter, which is the part ORF1A, and ORF1B are another chapter. The spike protein is an important chapter that you'll learn more about, which actually is the spike part of this. And then we have the E part, which is the envelope protein, and the membrane protein, and then we have also the nucleoside protein as well. So that's the parts that are different in the chapters, and these chapters can have problems with it. There are some 30,000 plus RNAs that are in the picture, that letters that are used to put this book together. So that's the part and the bottom line that you need to be aware of. So this book is formed subsequently, and this book has in the form of a virus, and then the copies of this book are in the form of multiple copies. These little red dots are the viruses from an electron microscopy attacking cells, and then that's a scary picture in some respects, but it shows you what goes on in these viruses. Now, some of these viruses would start to have changes in their structure, and some of the areas may change, and then that's what the areas that may change. So we have mutations that can happen where the words would get changed. So the ACU may change to ACA, but interestingly, when you say ACA, it still remains threonine, and that's does not change. So it's a silent mutation. If it's at the last level, most of the time these are going to be silent mutations. But at level 2, if there's a change that happens here, that would actually result in a problem where you will actually have change of the threonine will move towards becoming isoleucine. and that actually changes the structure. And that's where the mutations are not silent mutations any longer. So silent mutations we can live with. The non-silent one can be a little bit of a challenge. But again, if the structure is not changing very significantly, we can still live with those. The good news is with this virus, which is a relatively stable virus, which means there's a proofreading mechanism that is there. There is an RNA polymerase and also the SARS-CoV proofreading complex, which actually allows somebody, these polymerase to actually check and make sure if there's an error, it fixes it. And that makes this a stable virus, and which is good news because it's not a rapidly changing virus. Like flu virus is a very rapidly changing virus. That's why we need frequent vaccinations because of its changes. And HIV virus is also a very rapidly changing virus, and that's why we've had difficulty making a vaccine for the HIV virus. But this virus being a stable virus because of its existing role of RNA polymerase gives us a protection that the virus structure does not change as rapidly as most or many other viruses do. And that's why vaccines may not have to be given every year, at least from what we know so far, because there's a protection that is in place. Now, what has been happening is, as you can see, that there are silent and non-silent mutations that have happened. This is about the actual changes that we have seen with the B117 variant, where there's a deletion that has happened in the ORF1A site, and their spike protein site has some changes, and then some of those changes have been meaningful that have resulted in the new variant to be impacted. We are calling this B117, which is exactly similar with the one that is also S501Y. And that basically is in the spike protein region of the chapter, if you will. And there is a location 501 where the N has been changed to a Y. And you know what an N and a Y is based on the amino acid changes that have happened. Those changes have resulted in this virus to act a little bit differently, and that's why it can be useful to identify this and see how we can have a protection strategies around these, and this would become very, very relevant. This is actually the graph which actually talk about the spread using the same genetic information. We've been able to look at what kind of mobility and spread is happening in the various parts of the world. And you can actually see it in much more depth from the phylogeny through the GIS-AID mechanism of changing that they're following, tracking across the world. And then we are seeing some of the patterns that have been changing. And in the relevance of the patterns are that they have emerged and there have been changes, and some of those changes have been somewhat more relevant than the others. But there are people in the international level and WHO related functions which are allowing the people to this. And then this tracking has allowed to find out what's happening in the United Kingdom, the B117 that we've talked about, and the South Africa. Now, interestingly, the same mutation has happened in two parts of the world. So that suggests that the virus has that area which is a vulnerable area of the changes that have happened. And in both situations, the virus has become a little bit faster in its spread. Again, something that we should be aware of and then need to have a protection for ourselves about. So this is something that I had posted before, that this is relevant because many countries, actually developed countries, are sequencing their viruses. Why is it relevant? Because the sequencing tells us where the virus is coming from, how it's spreading, and what are the bigger impacts that it has. So Australia has done a pretty good job, 58.6. The issue was that the United States has been way behind in our capacity, or well, we have the capacity in our efforts to do the sequencing of the virus, and that has become more relevant because the virus has changed. And I think with the changes that we have seen, it's going to be important to be more vigilant on this. So what do we need to do? Well, first and foremost, the most basic thing does not change at all. The three W's are: wear your mask, wait and then have your social distancing, and wash your hands the way you've been taught, 20-second time that it takes. That must continue, and be obsessive about it, because we need to be even more obsessive if you have a virus that can spread further. increase the sequencing across the United States. And this is what I just touched on earlier, that we need to increase our sequencing and do a better job so we can have much higher numbers and try to identify and follow this. We have, unfortunately, the highest number of cases in the world. And then as a result of that, we need to actually be very vigilant about how this virus is mutating within our part of the world, and then what we can do to be able to be aware of it and protect ourselves, and then see if there is a variant which is going to jump species, or which is, if there's a variant which can reinfect, then we have to have a strategic plan and be ahead of the curve to take care of our population. This is going to be critical. GISAID, which is actually something global initiative on sharing all influenza data. If you know, every year you get a new influenza vaccine. It is through the GSAID which actually collects all of the data on the different kinds and types of changes that have happened in the influenza virus. And this highway, this communication, this system of genetic watching has been very effective. And now this highway is being used for coronavirus and is going to save lives. If we need to just make sure we empower them to be able to do a good job, because we have learned how valuable this is. And then increase the collaboration and coordination across the states and across the different countries, because we are all linked together. And with our travels and transportation or other ways of the spread of this virus locally and regionally and internationally, we will need a lot more of this effort. So I wanted to put this out there for you to have a basic understanding as we have these conversations. Good news is, if you have the infection, you are protected, and if you survive the infection. And if you have the vaccine, you're going to be protected from this variant and most likely the other variants that we are talking about. And the severity of illness, as of right now, we have no evidence of that worsening, and the spread is a part of the issue, and we have to watch this. And then in future, there could be more mutations, so we have to be vigilant about this. Hope everybody's well. Have a great new year. Just wanted to get this information all up to you. Stay well.